everyone. We are continuing with our week 4 lecture. Okay, this is the second lecture in our week 4. We are discussing policy monitoring, and in the last class we discussed what is policy monitoring and what are the major functions of policy monitoring. So today we will be discussing what are the assumptions of policy monitoring, what are the essential of policy monitoring, and what are the different approaches that the monitors can take for monitoring activities. Okay. And basically in today's lecture we will be discussing the managerial approaches. Managerial approaches including the critical path method. Okay. And by taking an example we will be discussing what are the steps that are involved in the critical path method in monitoring activities. Okay. So let's discuss about the assumptions of policy monitoring. Okay. So now you can just recall that you are a monitor. Okay, and monitor happens during the implementation of the policy. Okay. So for measuring the policy implementation, the monitoring agency usually takes some indicators or they have some desired objectives, and accordingly they try to measure the policy implementation. Okay. So that means we should not be under impression that the policy during the policy monitoring, since the policy implementation is under process, it cannot be measured. But yes, that is the reason we are taking the assumption that policy or program can also be measurable even though it is under the implementation stage by taking into account some indicators or desired objectives. Okay. And the second assumptions that we are taking, that many times we are get the information like this, that the personnel who are involved in the monitoring activities, so they are not responsible or accountable for the kind of policy implementation and monitoring happens. But the assumption is that there is personal responsibility for program or the policy that is assigned to the personnel or the monitors involved over there. And this is true for all the levels in the organizations as well. The third assumption that we are taking, that many times we also hear that because there is paucity of time for monitoring activities, and hence the monitoring activities cannot be trusted, or monitoring activities cannot be undertaken smoothly as per the required time. Okay. But here the assumption is that for monitoring activities enough amount of time is provided. So there is adequacy of time for monitoring is ensured. And another assumption of the policy monitoring is that if at all we are finding or the monitoring agency is finding any deviations from the program performances, then they are equipped with adequate number of tools for correcting the deviations or removing the deviations. So all these informations and tools are available with the policy monitoring agencies. Okay. And also we are taking this assumption that if the deviations are identified, then provisions also exist for adjusting with corrections for deviations from the planned progress. So this adjustment facilities are also available. Okay. So in a nutshell we can say that many times we are finding some of the practical aspects of monitoring, like there is inadequacy of time, or no personnel is accountable for whatever they do undertake as a part of the monitoring exercise. But we are finding here, we are assuming here that for policy monitoring adequate amount of time is provided. So the personnel, those who are involved in monitoring, they are equipped with adequate tools for removing the deviations if at all that is identified. So provisions exist for adjustment with correction for the deviations. Okay. So moving to the essential for monitoring, right. So here we will be understanding what are the basic requirements for monitoring. The first requirement for monitoring agency is planning. They need to plan properly, okay, for executing the monitoring activities. Okay, monitoring activities for a particular plan or a program. Okay, so it is needed to establish the expectations, right, against which the implementers or the policy makers, they monitors the policy delivery process or policy implementation process. So during the planning stage we need to establish this expectations. Okay, what is the intended expectations, okay, against which the implementers or the policy makers do monitor for the policy delivery process. Okay. So, this planning one must be executed for the on the part of the monitoring agency. The second essential condition for monitoring is allocation. Okay. So, for monitoring exercise, the monitors needs to get allocations, that means allocation of resources for monitoring activities. Okay. So, it means the allocation of resources to the policy monitoring and policy delivery processes. Okay. The third essential for the monitoring is implementation. To what extent the plan, right, is going to be executed. So, it refers to the implementation of the plans that we have already done here, that to establish expectations against which the implementers or policy makers monitors the delivery processes. So, in this implementation, it refers to what extent the technical planned work is matching with, right, the expected policy delivery. Okay. So, it refers to doing the technical work planned in the policy delivery process. Okay. And in the technical work, we can think about the time factor, right, and also the technical cost factor, okay, and technical aspects, okay, and time aspects and cost aspects. Okay. So, everything is included in technical work, what kind of activities are required, which needs cost, which needs time. So, another essential for understanding the monitoring is measurement. Okay. So, that means the performance indicators that, so the monitoring agency for evaluating, they have already identified the indicators for measuring performance. Okay. So, in measurement, we are observing the performance indicators on all the parameters. Okay. So, be it on technical indicators or time indicators or cost aspects. Okay. So that we can detect the deviations from the policy delivery, that is planned performance. Okay. So, suppose say that a particular plan requires, as per the expected one, right, requires let's say some activities, X technical activities, X1 technical activities, X2, right. So, these two technical activities must be finished during a period of let's say 2 months. Okay, involving a cost of let's say 1.9 crores rupees. Okay. So, this is the expectation. Okay. While monitoring, the monitors, they need to identify whether these two technical activities have already been completed or not, right, within this time frame, that is 2 months, involving a cost of 1.9 crore or less. Okay. So, that is what is the measurement. But if the monitors are finding that out of these two expected technical activities, only one is completed, right, and the time frame is already 1.5 months, right, the targeted months is 2 months, within 2 months two technical activities must be finished. But now actually while doing the monitoring, so the monitors identify that only one technical activity X1 is completed within 1.5 months, right, and around 1 crore rupees is already spent. Okay. So, then here we are finding a deviation, right. So, that is the reason the monitors measures performance of indicators on all the parameters, technical parameter, time parameter, and also cost parameters in order to identify the deviation from the policy delivery. Okay. And then the next essential for the policy monitoring is to understand the evaluation. Okay. So, what is this evaluation? That evaluation helps us to prepare the analysis for identify the causes of deviation, because here we have already found that there is a deviation here, here and here. In all these three parameters we are finding that there is a deviation. Okay. So, in evaluation we try to find out what are the causes behind this deviation from the planned performance, right. Planned performance is two activities, two technical activities, 2 months and 1.9 crores. And while monitored, then we are finding that only X1, one technical activity one is completed involving 1.5 months and 1 crore rupees. Okay. So, then we are trying to find out that when deviations are existing in all these three parameters, then what are the causes behind these deviations. causes behind this deviation, why not 2 activities, why not 2 technical activities, only one, why not 2.2 months, within 2 months to 2 activities, but why only for completing one activities it already involve 1.5 months involving 1 crore rupees. Okay. So, we are trying to identify the probable causes for this deviation in all these fronts. Okay. So, that is your evaluation. And the last one that is also needed is adjustment. Okay. So, what is this adjustment? So, if there is any deviation is found, okay, then the monitor should have corrective actions or corrective tools to resolve the deviations, right, which may result from the policy delivery. So, there should be adequate number of correction actions, okay, available with the monitoring agency to resolve the deviations that we are finding. So, that is known as the corrective adjustment. Okay. So, now we can discuss what are the different approaches of policy monitoring. Okay. So, generally we are finding different types of policy monitoring approaches. The first one is managerial approach, the second one is system approach, formative approach, performance and measurement approach, and also the other approaches like your social system accounting approach. Okay. So, today we will be discussing the managerial approach. Okay. Under managerial approaches, there are 3 approaches: the critical path method approach, program evaluation and review technique approach, and the last one is planning, programming and budgeting system approach. Okay. So, today we will be taking the first approach under the managerial approaches, that is critical path method or CPM. Okay. So, before understanding what is CPM, let us understand the managerial approaches. Okay. So, managerial approaches are really very popular approaches in the policy implementation. Okay. And this managerial approach involved, as I told you, that there are three methods involved here: critical path method, program evaluation and review technique. Okay. So, the last one is planning, programming and budgeting system, but however generally these two popular methods are compared together: critical path method and program evaluation and review technique, PERT. Okay. So, we are discussing these two first, that is critical path method and program evaluation and review technique method. And if you see these two managerial approaches, right, so their objective is to use the resources in the most efficient manner. Okay. Use the resources and materials in the most efficient manner. Okay. And that is the reason, since it is all about efficient use of resources, that is material and resources. So, that is the reason planning is emphasized much in both the approaches for particular program, so that both the program emphasizes on allocation of the resources like manpower and other resources, and also they emphasize on monitoring their progresses. Okay. Given this understanding, now let us discuss about the first one, that is first method under the managerial approach of monitoring is critical path method. Okay. So, what is this critical path method? This is a technique, algorithm technique basically, and targets to identify the activities which are very critical, very sensitive to the successful implementation of a particular plan or a program on time. Okay. So, 3 things are very important. What is this CPM? Algorithm technique, step by step, sequence by sequence. Okay. Activities by activities in sequence as well. Okay. And the second one is, once we emphasize that this is a algorithm technique, then we need to identify the activities in sequence, and out of these sequential activities we need to identify which are very critical to the successful implementation of the said policy or program. Okay. And the last one is emphasis on time. This policy or program should be implemented within the targeted time. So, on time aspect is also emphasized. Okay. So, as I told you that it is a technique, algorithm technique. So, it involves a step by step project management technique for processing the planning, and it defines the task which are critical in nature and which are non-critical in nature, so that it can prevent time frame and also it can process the bottlenecks. Okay. So basically when we are finding, when in a project or in a program or a policy, there involves lot of activities, numerous activities, and these numerous activities also they interact in a very complex manner. So in that case, okay, in those contexts, so we generally use critical path method, okay, in order to optimize our resources. So understanding this, what exactly is CPM, now we can identify some of the steps, right? What are the steps involved in undertaking this critical path method? The first requirement is define the task that are required. Define the required task and put them in a sequence. Okay, what is the first one to do, what is the second one to do, and likewise. Okay, and in this way we can create a flow chart or some kind of diagram showing that each task is related to the other task. So that is the reason we are emphasizing on this word sequence. What is the first one to be done, and what is the second and the third one. And once this sequencing and flow charting is done, then we need to identify what are the critical tasks or what are the non-critical tasks, right, among all the tasks that is already listed here. Then determine the expected completion or execution time for each task. Let us say there are 8 tasks involved. Okay. So we need to determine what is the expected time for the completion of each of the tasks. What is the first task for the completion of the task? So what is the time required? Then after we can locate and devise the alternative for the most critical paths. Okay. So once we are assigning this, then we can identify which are out of these 8 activities, which are the critical activities, and we can locate those most critical and non-critical activities. Okay. So in order to understand these steps, we can take an example. Okay. And as we understand that CPM emphasizes on optimizing the resources. Okay. So CPM determines the minimum duration of a project implementation or a program implementation. So let's take a project called X. Okay. And what is our target? Target is to, since it is a monitoring, project monitoring activity, right. So that is the reason we need to determine the minimum project duration for this project X. Okay. So this is the data table given, that means, and there are 5 different activities that is required for the completion of the project X. Okay. And for this project X, the activities are sequenced here, that means A starts, and after the completion of A, B starts, then C, D and E. So this is in sequence, and the description is also mentioned here. For A, there is no prerequisite, okay, and there is no predecessors also. So it requires 2 weeks time for completion of A activity. Okay. So likewise for B activities, what is exactly the activity? It is the design activity. So it is a case of your software development. Okay. So this is a project X. And likewise for C activity, this is coding activities, and for this starting C, A should be completed. So the predecessor of C is A, right. For D, the predecessors are B and C. For E, the predecessor is D, okay. And here the expected duration is mentioned for each of the activities, okay, clear. So given this understanding, we need to identify what is the minimum duration of this project S, okay. Because if you see the activity wise, then we are finding the total duration of the project is 12 weeks, right. Okay. But we have to find out what is the minimum duration involved for this particular project. Okay. So for this we need to identify, we need to do this network diagramming. Okay. So now you can, what you can do, you please write down this table. Okay. This is our data. So based on this data, now we can move on to identify what would be the minimum duration of this project, because the CPM emphasizes on the optimization of resources. Okay. So here the time, resource is time. So we are trying to optimize, that means minimize the time. instead of 12 weeks, what is the minimum duration required for this project X. Okay. So, the first step that we are doing is in terms of network diagramming. Okay. So, if you see, since there are 5 activities involved, A can start, for A there is no requirement. Okay. So, there is no predecessor. So, A can start as soon as possible, that means at 0 time A activity can start, right. Likewise, for B and C activity, if you see the data table, for B and C activity, okay, both can start once A is started. Okay. So, what is the earliest time to start B and C? The earliest time to start B and C is at least 2 weeks, right, because B and C can start once A gets completed. So, the duration of A is 2 weeks. So, that is the reason B and C can start after A, that means after 2 weeks. Okay. And the D activity can start after B and C are both finished, right. So, what is the duration for D? D starts after B and C both are finished. Okay. So, B is taking more time, that is 4, and C is taking less time, that is 3, but D can start once both can finish. So, that means we have to take into account the maximum time duration, okay, then only D can start. So, after the completion of B, then we can start D. So, what is the maximum duration required for starting D? So, it would be what? For B, so D can start, right, D can start after what? 2 plus 4, okay. So, this is like for B it is 4 weeks, okay, and for C it is 3 weeks, okay, and maximum of is 4 and 3. So, 4 and plus 2, right. So, this is 2 plus 4 or 2 plus 3. So, between 2 plus 4 and 2 plus 3 we have to take the maximum duration. So, we are taking 6 weeks, right. So, that means D can start after 6 weeks, okay, after both B and C are getting completed, okay. And coming to E, that is our last activity, E can start after D finishes, that is what the data table is pointing, okay. So, that means, so for D it takes 6 weeks, okay, 6 plus our E can start after 6 weeks plus already 2 weeks, okay, 2 weeks for the A. So, in this way we can find that E can start after the completion of 8 weeks, okay. And since our target is to find out the minimum duration required for the completion of the project, so we can adopt this method which is known as forward pass, okay. Forward pass involves the earliest start and also the earliest finish time. And for earliest finish, we can find the earliest finish, that is earliest start duration, okay, earliest start plus the duration, earliest start plus duration, okay. So, for activity A, the first activity, the earliest start is 0 because no requirement is needed. So, as soon as one is ready, then activity A can be started. So, the earliest start for A activity is 0. And what is the earliest finish? Earliest finish of A activity is earliest start plus what is the duration needed for the completion of A. So, that is 2 weeks. So, the earliest finish for activity A equal to 0 plus 2 equal to 2. Okay. So, likewise for B activity, what is the earliest start? For B activity, the earliest start is, look at the table, data table that we have given. So, earliest start is what? A should be completed, right. This is what is the predecessor is A. So, A should be completed means the 2 weeks duration should be over. So, the earliest start for B is at least 2 weeks should be completed. So, earliest start is 2 weeks. So, what is the earliest finish? Earliest finish is earliest start plus duration for this activity B. So, earliest finish for B equal to the earliest start, that is 2 plus the duration for B is 4. So, it is 6 weeks. Okay. So, likewise we can Also find what is the earliest start for C, activity C. So in the data table we can find that the earliest start for C, right, is 2 also. Why? Because the predecessor for C equal to A, right, and duration of A equal to 2. So the earliest start for C equal to 2 years and earliest finish would be how much? Earliest start plus duration of that specific activity C. So 2 plus 3 equal to 5 weeks. Okay. So likewise we can find out what is the earliest start for D activity, and if you see the data table, that is D activity is for testing, right. So for D activity the earliest start would be the maximum of earliest finish of the B activity and C activity. So for the earliest finish of B and C activity is 6 weeks and 5 weeks respectively. So we have to take into account the maximum out of these two. So it is 6. Okay. So the earliest finish would be the earliest start, okay, plus the duration of D equal to 2. So it is 6 plus 2 equal to 8 weeks. Okay. And finally the last activity is E, the earliest start would be 8 weeks. Okay. Why? Because for E activity to begin, the D activity should be completed. The predecessor is D, and for D it requires 8 weeks. So the earliest start for E would be the 8 weeks. So what would be the earliest finish for E? That is earliest start plus duration of the E. So 8 plus 1 equal to 9. Okay. Now all these activities are completed, right. So E is our last activity for this particular task, for the completion of this particular task or project. So if we are using this forward pass method, then we are finding that the project duration, right, the minimum project duration is 9 weeks. Okay. If you see the table, what is the duration for the completion of this particular project X? It was 12 weeks. So now you have optimized or minimized that at least 9 weeks, okay, would be required for the completion of this project. Okay. So now what is the next task? Next task is to identify what are the critical and non-critical activity. Okay. So let's do that. So for identifying the critical and non-critical activity, we need to apply what is known as the backward pass. Okay. So in backward pass, we need to identify the latest start and latest finish. Okay. And a latest start can be found by subtracting duration from the latest finish. Okay. So what you have found? What you have found in the last slide? We have found that the duration of the project is now 9 weeks. Okay. So we can start from the backward. Okay. So in the last method, forward pass method, we started from the first, right, from point from activity A. Now since we are following the backward pass, we can start from the last, that is from point E. Okay. So we will be starting at the end point with the project duration of 9 weeks. Okay. And for E activity, what is the latest finish? Latest finish would be 9, right. And what would be latest start? Latest start for the activity E. So that is the latest finish, that is 9 minus the duration of that particular activity equal to 1. So 9 minus 1 equal to 8 weeks. Okay. So we are moving backward from E to A. Okay. So now come to D. For D activity, what is the latest finish? The latest finish is once E is completed, right. So latest finish, for latest start, we can find the latest finish equal to 8 and the specific duration for D equal to 2. So it is 6 weeks. So likewise, we can find the latest start for D activity, B activity and all other activities. Okay. So we are finding that for A, the latest finish, okay, is 0. So for C, the latest finish is 3. For B, latest finish is 2 and likewise. Okay. So, once we found this latest finish, then we can identify the critical path. Okay. So, for that we need to identify critical path means the total float should be 0. Okay. So, what is this total float or total slack? The amount of time a particular task like A, B, C, D, E, right? The amount of time a particular task can be delayed without delaying the start of its successor task. Okay. So, that means how B can be delayed, but simultaneously this the successor like E's time should not be delayed. So, without impacting the starting time of D, to what extent B timing can be delayed. So, that is known as the slack float. Okay. So, the amount of time a task can be delayed without delaying the start of the successor. Okay. So, given this understanding, now we can find out the total float or total slack. So, what is that? So latest start minus earliest start. Okay. So, for A activity, what is the latest start? That we have already found out. So, it is 0 and earliest start is also 0. Latest start you can find, you can go back. For A, latest start is 0, okay, and earliest start is also 0, right. So, now you can go back and you need to just put this number, latest start minus earliest start. Okay. So, for A, latest start is 0, earliest start is 0, so equal to 0. Okay. Right. So, for B, latest start is 2, earliest start is also 2, so it is 0. For C, latest start is 3 weeks, earliest start is 2 weeks, so it would be 1. The difference would be 1. Okay. For D, 6, latest start is 6, earliest start is also 6, then it is 0. And for E, latest start 8 weeks and earliest start is also 8 weeks, so it would be 8 minus 8 equal to 0. Okay. So, now based on these we need to identify which are the critical and which are not critical. So, what is critical? Critical means there is no time gap between this latest start and earliest start. So, here we are finding the gap between the latest start time and earliest start time is 0. Okay. So, we cannot adjust. So, which cannot be adjusted, that activity, that factor is known as most critical factor. Okay. So, we need to identify. So, for which activities the difference between these two is 0. So, we are finding this is 0 for A, 0 for B, 0 for D and 0 for E. So, that means out of these 5 activities, so we found that for 4 activities we can consider that these 4 activities are very critical activities where no adjustment is possible. Okay. And for only one activity, that is for C activities, the difference is 1, that means it is not a critical activity or critical factor and we can adjust. Okay. So, what would be the critical path? Then the first critical path equal to A, then to B, then to D, okay, then to E. Got it? So, by doing this exercise, what you have found? What you have found towards the monitoring of a particular task or project or program, that we found what is or what are the critical paths, okay, and what is the minimum duration for the completion of this project. So, instead of 12 weeks, we found the minimum duration of this project is 9 weeks. Okay. So, that is what is the objective of the critical path method, is emphasizing that how to optimize the resources. Okay. So, you can refer to these references. Okay. Thank you very much.